Jake Collins sat in the back row of Professor Veltar's xenobiology classroom, trying not to yawn. The tall, crystalline being clicked and chimed as he spoke, his voice sounding like wind moving through glass tubes. Around Jake, students from 12 different worlds took careful notes. Luna, the blue-skinned cetacean girl, wrote with webbed fingers. Zix, who looked like a giant praying mantis, tapped notes into a device with 4 arms. Korath, the lizard-like Draknari, scratched symbols on a heat-resistant tablet. Jake was the only human in the class. He had been at the Kepler Interstellar Academy on Zephyros Prime for 3 months now, and he still felt like the odd one out. Not because anyone was mean to him. Everyone was actually very nice. Too nice, maybe. They treated him like he might break if they looked at him wrong. Tomorrow we begin our field expedition to the scorching expanse, Professor Veltar announced. His crystal body caught the light from the room's artificial suns. You will study desert ecosystems and collect atmospheric readings. Each species will work in designated safe zones with full environmental protection. Jake perked up. Finally, something that sounded interesting. He was tired of sitting in climate-controlled classrooms learning about planets he might never visit. Professor Veltar's glowing eyes focused on Jake. However, Student Collins, you are strictly forbidden from entering the desert proper. Jake felt his stomach drop. Sir, why not? The scorching expanse reaches temperatures of 67 degrees Celsius, the professor explained. Humidity drops below 3%. The radiation from our twin suns would cook most organic matter in hours. Your species simply cannot survive. Such conditions. Murmurs of agreement came from around the room. Luna's gills fluttered nervously just thinking about the dry air. Zix's compound eyes clicked as he calculated survival times. Korath, whose people came from a desert world, nodded. Seriously. But Professor, Jake said, humans have lived in deserts for thousands of years back on Earth. Professor Veltar made a sound like breaking glass. Jake had learned this was the Minervan equivalent of a gentle laugh. Young Collins, the hottest desert on your world barely reaches 50 degrees Celsius, and that is considered extremely dangerous for your kind. The scorching expanse would kill you in minutes. Jake wanted to argue, but he knew it would not help. Ever since humans had joined the galactic community 20 years ago, everyone treated them like fragile flowers. The stories always focused on how humans needed exactly the right temperature, exactly the right air, exactly the right everything, or they would die. Nobody talked about how humans had spread across every continent on Earth, from the Arctic to the Sahara. I understand, Professor, Jake said quietly. After class, his friends gathered around him. Luna placed a damp, cool hand on his shoulder. Do not feel bad, Jake. The desert is dangerous for everyone. Even Korath's people need protection suits. Korath flicked his forked tongue. My ancestors evolved in heat, but nothing like the scorching expanse. The professors are right to keep you safe. Zix buzzed his wings in agreement. Humans are precious. There are so few of you compared to other species. We must protect you. Jake forced a smile. Yeah, I know. Thanks, guys. That evening, Jake sat in his dorm room reading everything he could find about the scorching expanse. His roommate, Nick Brown, was at study group, so Jake had the room to himself. The desert covered about 60% of Zephyros Prime's surface. It was considered completely worthless, too hot and dry for any known species to colonize. But as Jake read the geological surveys, something caught his attention. The mineral readings looked familiar. Iron oxide in the soil. Sparse but deep-rooted. Vegetation. Underground water signs. It reminded him of places he had been back on Earth. Jake's grandfather had worked construction in Nevada and Arizona. Every summer, Jake would visit and help with projects in the middle of nowhere. Grandpa taught him how to read the land, how to find water, how to stay cool when the temperature hit 45 degrees Celsius, and there was no shade for miles. The desert isn't trying to kill you, Grandpa always said. It's just testing whether you deserve to be there. Jake pulled up images of the scorching expanse on his tablet. Red sand dunes stretched to the horizon. Rocky outcroppings created natural windbreaks. In the distance, he could see what looked like dried riverbeds cutting through the landscape. To everyone else, it probably looked like hell. To Jake, it looked like the deserts back home, just turned up a few notches. His tablet chimed with a message from his mother back on Earth. "How are classes going, sweetie? Are you staying safe? Remember what the doctors said about avoiding extreme environments." Jake sighed. Even his own family bought into the idea that humans were too weak for the galaxy. Before he left for the academy, he had to pass dozens of medical tests. The doctors were amazed that his species had survived at all. They made it sound like humans needed perfect conditions just to stay alive. But Jake remembered different stories from his grandfather. Stories about the early pioneers who crossed Death Valley with nothing but determination and water. Stories about construction workers who built railroads across the Mojave Desert. Stories about soldiers who fought in deserts around the world and came home to tell about it. The next morning, Jake packed his gear for the expedition. Standard Academy uniform, water bottle, emergency supplies, and monitoring equipment. At the EI, last second he grabbed his old baseball cap from the desk drawer. It was faded and beat up, but Grandpa had given it to him years ago. "For when you need to think like a desert rat," Grandpa had said with a wink. The transport shuttles loaded up students and equipment as the twin suns rose over the academy. Jake could already feel the heat building, even through the shuttle's climate control. Around him, his classmates checked and double-checked their environmental suits and cooling systems. Professor Veltar conducted a final safety briefing. "Remember, no one ventures beyond the marked safe zones without full protection. The base camp will maintain comfortable conditions for all species." His crystal eyes found Jake again. "Student Collins, you will monitor equipment from the shaded station. Under no circumstances are you to approach the desert proper." "Yes, sir," Jake replied. But as the shuttles lifted off toward the scorching expanse, he found himself thinking about his grandfather's stories and wondering if maybe, just maybe, everyone was wrong about what humans could handle. The desert waited ahead of them, red and endless under the alien suns. To his classmates, it was a dangerous place to be studied from a safe distance. To Jake, it was starting to look like an adventure. The shuttles touched down on a flat area of red rock at the edge of the scorching expanse. Jake pressed his face to the window and watched waves of heat shimmer across the landscape. Even through the thick glass, he could feel warmth radiating. From the ground outside, Dr. Kess, the expedition leader, was a Draknari who stood nearly 8 feet tall. His scales were dark green with black stripes, and his yellow eyes could spot movement from miles away. He had led dozens of expeditions to dangerous worlds, but even he seemed nervous about this desert. "Base camp will be established here, Doctor," Kess announced as the students filed out of the shuttles. "Climate control systems will maintain safe temperatures and humidity levels. All students will work in teams of 3, never alone, and never beyond the marked perimeter." The base camp was impressive. Prefabricated buildings snapped together in minutes, creating laboratories, sleeping quarters, and common areas. Force. Fields kept the worst of the heat out, while cooling systems brought the temperature down to comfortable levels for most species. Jake was assigned to the monitoring station, a shaded area filled with screens and sensors that tracked everything happening in the desert. His job was to watch the readings and alert Dr. Kess if anything went wrong with the equipment or the student teams. "This is important work, Jake," Dr. Kess told him. "The sensors can detect problems before the teams even know they are in danger. Your species has excellent pattern recognition abilities." Jake nodded, but part of him felt like he was being kept in the kids' area while the adults did the real work. Through the station's windows, he could see his classmates suiting up in full environmental gear. The suits were bulky white things with cooling systems, air recyclers, and emergency beacons. They looked like walking refrigerators. Luna waved at him through her suit's faceplate as her team prepared to collect water samples from a distant rock formation. Even with all her protection, Jake could see sweat beading on her blue skin. Zix's team was studying plant life near the camp perimeter. His suit had been specially modified to accommodate his 4 arms and wing cases. Korath's group was taking soil samples from what used to be a river delta. "Stay hydrated, human," Dr. Kess reminded Jake before heading out with his own research team. "The heat exchangers will keep this area tolerable for your species, but you must still be careful." Jake settled into his chair and started watching the monitors. Dozens of screens showed feeds from cameras scattered across the desert. Temperature readings, wind patterns, radiation levels, soil composition. It was actually pretty interesting data. But as the day went on, Jake noticed something that the other scientists seemed to miss. The desert was not just a random wasteland. There were patterns in the rock formations that suggested old water flows. Certain areas stayed cooler than others, creating microclimates where plants could grow. The wind moved in predictable ways that could be used for natural cooling. It reminded Jake of camping trips with his Uncle Pete in Death Valley. Uncle Pete was a geologist who taught Jake how to read landscapes like books. "Every rock tells a story," he used to say. "Every plant is a sign pointing to water." Around midday, an alarm started beeping on Jake's console. One of the student teams was in trouble. Amy Foster, a Rigelian student whose people were made of living crystal, had become separated from her group. Her environmental suit was overheating, and her team could not reach her in time. Jake watched Amy's location on the main screen. She was in a valley about 2 miles from base camp, in an area where the temperature readings showed 68 degrees Celsius. Her suit's cooling system was failing, and the backup power would only last 20 more minutes. Dr. Kess rushed back to the monitoring station. "Prepare the emergency rescue shuttle," he ordered his assistants. "Full cooling gear and medical support." "Sir," one of the assistants said, "the shuttle needs 30 minutes to prep for those temperature extremes. By then, we'll lose her," Dr. Kess finished grimly. His scales had gone pale with worry. Jake stared at the screen showing Amy's position. The valley she was trapped in actually looked familiar. The rock formations created natural shade, and there were signs of underground water nearby. If someone could get to her quickly and provide some basic cooling until the rescue shuttle arrived, she might survive. "I could reach her," Jake said quietly. Dr. Kess turned to stare at him. "Absolutely not. The temperature would kill you in minutes." "But, sir, look at the topography." Jake pointed to the screen. "There's a path along the shaded side of those rocks. The ground temperature there would be lower. And see those green spots? That's vegetation, which means water underneath. I could make it there and back." "Human Collins, you do not understand," Dr. Kess said firmly. "Your species cannot survive in that environment. Even our people need full protection, and we evolved in desert conditions." Jake looked at the clock. Amy had 18 minutes left. Before her suit failed completely, the rescue shuttle needed 28 minutes minimum. Someone had to go now, or they would lose her. "What if I'm wrong about humans?" Jake asked. "What if we're tougher than everyone thinks?" Dr. Kess shook his head. "I cannot allow you to commit suicide even to save another student." But Jake was already moving. He grabbed his water bottle and headed for the exit. "I'm sorry, sir. I have to try." "Collins, stop," Dr. Kess called after him. "That is an order." Jake paused at the force field barrier that separated the base camp from the open desert. Beyond it, the heat shimmered like a living thing. The ground was red and cracked, with scattered rocks throwing small patches of shadow. In the distance, he could see the valley where Amy was trapped. It did not look like certain death to Jake. It looked like a really hot day in Nevada. He took off his academy jacket and tied it around his waist. The baseball cap went on his head, pulled down low to shade his eyes. He had 2 bottles of water, basic emergency supplies, and about 16 minutes to save Amy Foster's life. "Tell my mom I tried to do the right thing," Jake called back to Dr. Kess. Then he stepped through the force field and into the furnace of the scorching expanse. The heat hit him like opening an oven door. Sweat immediately started beading on his forehead, but his body began adapting just like it had in the deserts back home. Jake started walking with steady, measured steps toward the distant valley where Amy was dying in her overheated suit. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Kess shouting orders to track his progress and prepare for 2 casualties instead of 1. The heat was intense, but Jake had felt worse. The summer he turned 16, he had worked with his grandfather building a fence line in Arizona during a heat wave. The temperature had hit 47 degrees Celsius, and they had worked through the whole day with nothing but water, salt tablets, and stubbornness. This was hotter, but not impossibly so. Jake walked at a steady pace, not too fast to overheat, not too slow to waste time. His grandfather had taught him the rhythm. "Walk like you're going somewhere important, but not like you're late for dinner," the old man used to say. Sweat poured down Jake's face and soaked his shirt, but that was actually good. Sweating was how humans cooled down. Every drop of moisture that evaporated took heat away from his body. Most aliens could not sweat effectively, which was why they needed mechanical cooling systems. Back at base camp, Jake could hear Dr. Kess shouting into his radio, coordinating rescue efforts for both Amy and Jake. The expedition leader was convinced he was about to lose 2 students instead of 1. Jake followed the path he had spotted on the monitors, staying in the shadows of rock formations whenever possible. The rocks were hot enough to fry an egg, but they also blocked the direct radiation from the twin suns. Between the shaded areas, Jake moved quickly across open ground, using techniques his Uncle Pete had taught him for desert hiking. "Never fight the desert," Uncle Pete always said. "Work with it. Find the cool spots, follow the water signs, and respect the heat without fearing it." 15 minutes into his walk, Jake reached the edge of the valley where Amy was trapped. He could see her environmental suit about 100 meters away, lying motionless behind a large boulder. The suit's white surface was streaked with mineral deposits from its failing cooling system. Jake slid down the rocky slope into the valley, using his hands and feet to control his descent. The rocks were burning hot, but he moved quickly enough to avoid serious burns. At the bottom, he found Amy unconscious inside her suit. The temperature readout on her helmet showed critical overheating. The Rigelian girl was in bad shape. Her crystal-like skin had gone from its normal clear blue to a cloudy gray color. That was a sign of thermal shock in her species. Without cooling, she would die within minutes. Jake looked around the valley, thinking fast. Amy's suit had failed, but the life support systems were still partially functional. What she needed was external cooling to supplement the failing internal systems. He remembered camping trips with his family in Utah, where his father had shown him how to create cooling shelters using emergency blankets and natural rock formations. The principle was simple. Use reflection and airflow to create a cooler microclimate. Jake pulled out his emergency kit and found a reflective thermal blanket. He stretched it between two rocks above Amy's position, creating a silvered canopy. That reflected the sun's radiation away from her. Then he used rocks to channel what little breeze existed through the shaded area, creating a primitive but effective cooling system. Next, Jake opened his water bottles and soaked his academy jacket thoroughly. He draped the wet fabric over Amy's helmet and chest, where the evaporating water would help draw heat away from her suit's interior. It was not much, but every degree mattered. Amy's suit readouts started showing slight improvements. Her internal temperature was still critical, but it had stopped climbing. The primitive cooling system was buying them time. Jake sat down in the shade next to Amy and keyed his emergency communicator. Base camp, this is Collins. I've reached Foster and established temporary cooling. Her condition is stable but critical. How long until the rescue shuttle arrives? Dr. Kess's voice crackled through the speaker. Collins, you should be dead by now. How is this possible? I don't know, sir. It's hot, but not any worse than summer. Back home. The important thing is Amy. She needs that shuttle. Rescue team is loading now. 12 minutes to your position. Can you maintain cooling until then? Jake checked his water supply. He had used most of one bottle for evaporative cooling and was sipping carefully from the second. In the desert, heat. He needed to balance cooling Amy with staying hydrated himself. Affirmative, sir. We'll be here. While they waited, Jake made small improvements to their shelter. He found a trickle of water seeping from the rocks nearby, exactly the kind of sign his grandfather had taught him to recognize. The water was hot, but it was still water. He used it to keep Amy's cooling cloths damp. Amy stirred as her suit's internal temperature dropped into safer ranges. Her eyes opened behind the helmet faceplate, unfocused, but alive. What happened? She whispered. Hey, Amy, it's Jake Collins. Your suit overheated, but help is coming. Just stay still and let the cooling system work. Jake? Amy's crystal features showed confusion. How are you here? Humans cannot survive in this heat. Jake grinned at her. Through the reflective shelter. Yeah, that's what everyone keeps telling me. Apparently, nobody asked the desert for its opinion. Amy managed a weak laugh. You are either very brave or very stupid. My grandfather always said those were the same thing. The rescue shuttle appeared overhead, its engines kicking up clouds of red dust as it landed nearby. The rescue team poured out wearing full environmental suits and carrying cooling equipment that looked like it belonged in a hospital. Commander Rex Stone, the team leader, was a veteran from the militaristic Proxima Collective. He had seen action on dozens of hostile worlds, but he stared at Jake like he was looking at a ghost. Son, you should not be alive right now, Rex said as his team carefully loaded Amy onto a cooling stretcher. The temperature readings in this valley show 68.5 degrees Celsius. That's lethal for human physiology. Jake stood up and stretched, feeling the heat, but not overwhelmed by it. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his skin was flushed, but he felt fine. "Commander, I spent summers working construction in Death Valley. This is definitely hotter, but it's not impossible." Rex checked his suit's external thermometer and shook his head. "My people evolved on a world with average temperatures of 50 degrees. Even we need cooling suits for this environment. Yet here you are, sitting in the shade like you're at a picnic." As the rescue team prepared to load Jake into the shuttle, he noticed something interesting. The heavily equipped rescue workers were already showing signs of heat stress despite their advanced cooling systems. Their movements were sluggish, and several were breathing heavily inside their helmets. "Commander," Jake said, offering his second water bottle to one of the struggling team members. "Would you like some water? You guys look like you could use it." Rex stared at the human offering hydration assistance to the rescue team. "This is completely backwards," he muttered. "We came here to save you." Jake climbed into the shuttle's blessed air conditioning and settled back for the ride to base camp. Through the windows, he could see the scorching expanse stretching out. In all directions, red, harsh, and beautiful in its own way. It reminded him of home. News of Jake's desert survival spread through the academy faster than a wildfire. By the time the rescue shuttle returned to base camp, students and faculty were gathering around the landing pad, all wanting to see the human who should have been dead. Professor Veltar's crystalline form practically vibrated with excitement as Jake stepped off the shuttle. "Student Collins, this is unprecedented. Our physiological models clearly show that humans cannot survive in such conditions, Dr." Kess was less excited and more confused. "I monitored his vital signs during the entire rescue operation," he told the gathering crowd. His heart rate was elevated but stable. His body temperature remained within acceptable ranges. By all scientific measures, he should have died within minutes of exposure. Jake felt uncomfortable being the center of so much attention. "Really? It wasn't that bad. Hot, yeah, but I've been in worse heat back on Earth." A ripple of disbelief went through the crowd. Luna's gills fluttered nervously as she approached Jake. "But Jake, the stories we hear about humans, your people need perfect conditions to survive. You die from small changes in temperature or air pressure." "Who told you that?" Jake asked. Zix buzzed his wings in what Jake had learned was confusion. "The galactic databases. Human physiology is listed as extremely fragile. Your species requires narrow environmental parameters and has poor adaptation abilities." Jake scratched his head. "That's weird. Back home, humans live everywhere from the Arctic to the Sahara Desert. We've got people living on mountains, in swamps, on islands, in places so cold that water turns solid and places so hot that—" He paused. "Well, places like this, I guess." Professor Veltar made his glass chime thinking sound. "This requires immediate investigation. Dr. Wells, please join us." Dr. Maya Wells was the human physiologist who served as Earth's scientific liaison to the Academy. She was a small woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but her credentials were impressive. She had written most of the papers about human biology that the galaxy used for reference. "Maya," Professor Veltar said when she arrived, "we need to understand what happened here. Student Collins survived 47 minutes of direct exposure to conditions that should have killed him." Dr. Wells examined Jake carefully, checking his temperature, hydration levels, and overall condition. "Jake, how do you feel right now?" "Tired and sweaty, but fine," Jake answered honestly. "Like I spent the day working outside in summer." Any dizziness, nausea, disorientation? No, ma'am. Actually, I feel pretty good. Dr. Wells nodded slowly. Professor, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about human capabilities. The reports sent to the galactic community focused on our vulnerabilities and medical needs, not our adaptations. Explain, Dr. Kess said, his scaled face showing intense interest. Humans evolved on a planet with extreme environmental diversity, Dr. Wells began. We had to adapt to ice ages, volcanic winters, droughts, floods, and climate changes that would destroy most civilizations. Our bodies are built for adaptation, not comfort. She pulled up a holographic display showing human anatomy. Look at our cooling system. We can produce up to 4 liters of sweat per hour when needed. That's more effective cooling than most mechanical systems. Our cardiovascular system can adjust blood flow to maintain core temperature across a wide range of conditions. Professor Veltar studied the display with fascination. But the medical reports we received emphasized human fragility. Those reports focused on what kills us, not what we can survive, Dr. Wells explained. Yes, humans die if they get too hot or too cold. But our definition of too hot is apparently different from everyone else's. Jake raised his hand. Dr. Wells, what's the hottest temperature humans have survived? Well, saunas can reach up to 90 degrees Celsius for short periods. Workers in some industrial environments handle even higher temperatures with proper hydration and cooling breaks. The human body is remarkably adaptable when it needs to be. The gathered alien faculty exchanged looks of amazement. Dr. Kess spoke first. On my homeworld, temperatures above 50 degrees are considered emergency conditions requiring immediate shelter. My people cannot function above 45 degrees without mechanical assistance, Professor Veltar added. Luna raised a webbed hand. Cetaceans die if water temperature exceeds 35 degrees. We assumed all biological systems had similar limits. Dr. Wells smiled. That's the thing about evolution. Every species adapts to their home environment. Earth just happens to have a very challenging home environment. But the survival reports, Professor Veltar began, were written by doctors and safety officials, Dr. Wells interrupted gently. Their job is to focus on what could go wrong, not what usually goes right. Humans have been living in deserts for thousands of years. We just never thought to mention it because it seemed normal to us. Jake thought about his grandfather, his Uncle Pete, and all the people he knew who worked in hot places. Back home, nobody thinks much about working in 40 or 45-degree heat. Construction workers, farmers, soldiers, it's just part of the job. Dr. Kess looked at his temperature readings from the valley where Jake had rescued Amy. But this was nearly 70 degrees Celsius, which is definitely hot, Jake admitted. But I had water, shade, and I took my time. Plus, I grew up doing this stuff. My body knows how to handle heat. Professor Veltar was quiet for a long moment, his crystalline form refracting light as he processed this information. Finally, he spoke. Student Collins, would you be willing to participate in a formal study? We need to understand the full extent of human environmental adaptation. What kind of study? Jake asked. Supervised exposure to gradually increasing temperatures, with full medical monitoring and emergency backup. Nothing dangerous, just scientific observation of your physiological responses. Jake thought about it. The desert had been challenging, but not overwhelming. And if this could help people understand that humans were not as fragile as everyone thought, it might be worth doing. Sure, he said, but I want to go back to that valley where I found Amy. There's something about the way water moves through that area that I'd like to explore." Dr. Wells raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The rock formations, the way plants grow in certain spots. It reminds me of places back home where people found underground springs. I think there might be more water in that desert than your surveys show." Professor Veltar's excitement was making his whole body glow. "If humans can not only survive in the scorching expanse, but also locate resources that our instruments missed, this could change everything we know about planetary development." Dr. Kess nodded slowly. "The desert covers 60% of our planet's surface. If it could be made habitable—" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Dr. Wells cautioned. "But, yes, this definitely warrants further investigation." As the crowd dispersed, Jake found himself looking out at the red expanse beyond the base camp. The twin suns were setting, turning the sky brilliant orange and purple. The desert looked beautiful. In the evening light, not hostile at all. Luna approached him as he watched the sunset. "Jake, are you really not afraid of that place?" Jake considered the question. "I respect it. Desert heat can kill you if you're careless. But fear it? No, it's just another environment to understand and work with." "You are very strange for a human," Luna said with what passed for a smile among her people. Jake grinned back. "Maybe. Or maybe humans are stranger than anyone realized." 3 days later, Professor Veltar called Jake to his office. The crystalline professor was practically humming with excitement, his body refracting light in rapid patterns that Jake had learned meant intense interest. "Student Collins, I have a proposition for you," Professor Veltar began. "The faculty has discussed your remarkable desert performance, and we would like to propose an extended research project." Jake leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of project?" 2 weeks in the scorching expanse, supervised by long-range monitors but essentially living independently in the environment. We want to understand not just human survival capabilities, but adaptation potential. The professor activated a holographic display showing the desert region. "Our goal is ambitious. If humans can thrive in conditions we consider uninhabitable, perhaps you can help us solve one of Zephyros Prime's greatest challenges, which is 60% of our planet's surface is desert. We have always considered it worthless wasteland, but if it could be made productive..." Professor Veltar's glow intensified. "It would revolutionize our entire civilization." Jake studied the map. The scorching expanse was vast, but he could see patterns in the topography that reminded him of places back home. Rock formations that would create natural windbreaks, valley systems that suggested ancient water flows, areas where the geology hinted at underground springs. What exactly would I be doing out there? 3 main objectives, Professor Veltar explained. First, map water sources using human intuition and observation. Our instruments may have missed signs that your species would recognize. Second, test sustainable living techniques in extreme environments. Third, evaluate the desert's potential for long-term habitation or resource development. Jake thought about his grandfather's stories of the early desert settlers, people who had carved farms out of places everyone said were uninhabitable. I'd have support if something went wrong. Your roommate, Nick Brown, has volunteered to serve. As your communications link and emergency coordinator, Dr. Wells will monitor your health remotely, and we'll have rescue teams on standby at all times. The idea was both exciting and daunting. 2 weeks alone in a desert that everyone considered deadly. But Jake remembered the feeling of walking through the valley to rescue Amy, challenging. Yes, but not impossible. I'll do it, he said. Nick was waiting outside the professor's office when Jake emerged. The other human student was shorter and stockier than Jake, with red hair and freckles that made him look younger than his 20 years. Are you crazy? Nick asked without preamble. 2 weeks in that furnace? What if something goes wrong? Then you'll coordinate the rescue, Jake replied with a grin. Come on, Nick. This could prove that humans aren't the fragile weaklings everyone thinks we are. We're not weaklings, Nick protested. But we're also not fireproof. Jake clapped his friend on the shoulder. Trust me. I've got this. The preparation took another week. Jake studied detailed geological surveys, weather patterns, and biological data about the desert. He packed equipment carefully, enough supplies to survive, but not so much that he'd be dependent on technology rather than adaptation. Dr. Wells helped him plan his nutrition and hydration strategy. The key is maintaining electrolyte balance, she explained. Your body will adapt to the heat, but you need to support the adaptation with proper intake. Jake packed salt tablets, high-energy foods, and water purification tablets. He also brought seeds from the Academy's botanical lab, an idea that made the alien scientists shake their heads in amazement. You want to try farming in the scorching? Expanse? Dr. Kess asked when Jake explained his plan. Not farming exactly, but back home, people have grown crops in some pretty harsh deserts. I want to see if the same principles might work here. Professor Zara Quinn, the Academy's leading agricultural scientist, reviewed Jake's seed selection with professional interest. These varieties are adapted for low water conditions, but the scorching expanse receives less than 2 centimeters of rainfall per year. I'm not depending on rainfall, Jake explained. I'm looking for underground water sources and ways to concentrate moisture from the air. Dr. Quinn's compound eyes, she was from an insect-like species that had developed advanced agriculture, focused intently on Jake. Student Collins, our most advanced hydroponic systems require enormous amounts of water and energy to grow crops. You believe you can accomplish this with primitive techniques? Maybe. My grandfather always said that plants want to grow. You just have to give them a chance. On departure day, half the Academy turned out to see Jake off. Luna presented him with a cetacean good luck charm made from deep-sea pearls. Zix buzzed a traditional Vesperian blessing song. Even Korath, normally reserved, clasped Jake's shoulder with a scaled hand. Bring back proof that the impossible is just improbable, Korath said solemnly. The transport shuttle dropped Jake at a rocky outcropping about 10 miles into the desert. His supplies were minimal by galactic standards. Water for 3 days, food for a week, basic tools, and emergency communications equipment. Everything else he would have to find or make. As the shuttle lifted off, Jake found himself alone in the vast red landscape. The twin suns blazed overhead, and the temperature was already climbing past 60 degrees. Heat waves danced across the rocks like living things. But Jake felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. This was the same feeling he'd had as a kid when his grandfather would drop him off in the Nevada wilderness with a water bottle and a challenge. Find your way back to camp, boy. The desert will teach you what you need to know. Jake pulled on, his baseball cap, shouldered his pack, and started walking deeper into the scorching expanse. He had 2 weeks to prove that humans could not only survive in the impossible, but thrive in it. Behind him, Nick's voice crackled over the radio. Jake, you reading me? All your vital signs look good from here. Copy that, Nick. Beginning phase. 1 exploration. The desert doesn't look angry today. I think we're going to be friends." "You're insane," Nick replied, but there was fondness in his voice. "Stay alive out there." Jake grinned as he walked toward a distant rock formation that looked like it might shelter a water source. "That's the plan." The desert stretched endlessly around him, red and harsh and beautiful. To the alien observers monitoring from the academy, it looked like a death trap. To Jake, it looked like home. By the 5th day in the desert, Jake had found 3 water sources that the academy surveys had missed completely. The first was a spring hidden in a canyon where ancient rock formations created a natural cooling system. The second was a series of small pools fed by underground streams. The third was the discovery that changed everything. Following a dry riverbed that twisted between red rock walls, Jake found a hidden valley about the size of a football field. It was sheltered from the worst heat by high cliffs on 3 sides, and a steady stream of clear water ran along one edge. Not just a trickle, but actual flowing water in the middle of the scorching expanse. "Nick, are you getting this?" Jake spoke into his communicator as he explored the valley. "I found an oasis that doesn't show up on any of the geological surveys," Nick's voice crackled back through the radio. "The satellite imagery is picking up your location, but it just shows rock formations. Are you sure there's water there?" Jake knelt by the stream and filled his water bottle. The water was warm but clean, flowing from springs somewhere deep in the rock. "I'm drinking it right now. This place is incredible." Back at the academy, Professor Veltar and Dr. Wells were studying the satellite feeds with growing amazement. The valley Jake had found existed in a geological blind spot, a place where their instruments showed only empty rock. But human eyes could see the subtle signs that led to hidden water. "This is the 4th water source he's located in 5 days," Dr. Wells reported to the gathered faculty. "Our geological surveys were extensive, but apparently they missed the indicators that human intuition recognizes." Jake spent the rest of that day exploring his hidden valley. The microclimate was remarkable, still hot, but bearable even during the peak heat of midday. The rock walls created natural wind patterns that provided cooling. The stream supported small patches of native vegetation, proving that plant life could survive here with adequate water. That evening, as the twin suns set and the temperature dropped to merely warm instead of blazing, Jake made a decision that his alien observers would later call either brilliant or insane. He was going to plant a garden. "Nick, I need you to contact Professor Quinn in the botanical lab," Jake said into his communicator. "I want to try something with those seeds I brought." "Jake, you've been in the heat too long," Nick replied. "You can't grow anything in that desert." "Actually, I think I can. This valley has everything plants need: water, shelter from extreme heat, and good soil composition from centuries of rock erosion. It's like a natural greenhouse." Back at the academy, Professor Quinn received Jake's request with professional skepticism. "Student Collins wants to attempt agriculture in the scorching expanse? Even our most advanced hydroponic systems would fail in those conditions." But Dr. Wells was intrigued. "Professor, humans have a long history of growing crops in hostile environments. Perhaps we should see what he can accomplish." The next morning, Jake began preparing his garden. Using techniques his Uncle Pete had taught him during summer jobs on California farms, Jake started by analyzing the soil. The valley floor was rich with minerals from rock erosion and organic matter from the sparse vegetation. With proper water management, it could support plant growth. Jake built irrigation channels using flat stones from the stream bed, creating a network that would distribute water efficiently across the growing area. He used his grandfather's dry farming techniques to retain moisture in the soil and positioned reflective rocks to provide heat regulation for different types of plants. The alien scientists monitoring his progress were fascinated and bewildered. Professor Quinn watched through satellite cameras as Jake worked without any advanced technology, just human knowledge and simple tools. He's achieving water distribution efficiency that rivals our best agricultural systems, she reported to her colleagues, and he's doing it with rocks and intuition. Jake planted his seeds in carefully prepared sections of the valley. Tomatoes in the shadiest area, desert-adapted squash where they would get morning sun but afternoon shade. And in the center of his garden, where the soil was richest and the water flow most reliable, he planted watermelon seeds. Watermelons? Nick's voice carried disbelief through the radio. Jake, those things need massive amounts of water and perfect temperature control. They'll die in a day. Maybe, Jake replied as he gently covered the seeds with soil. But my great-grandmother grew watermelons in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl. If she could make it work with almost no water and temperatures over 45 degrees, maybe I can make it work here. The alien faculty thought Jake had finally succumbed to heat exhaustion. Watermelons were known to be among the most water-intensive crops in the galaxy. The idea of growing them in the scorching expanse seemed like complete madness. But Jake remembered stories his great-grandmother had told about Depression-era farming. How people had learned to grow food in impossible conditions, using nothing but determination and understanding of how plants really worked. Plants want to survive, she used to say. Give them half a chance and they'll surprise you. Jake tended his impossible garden with techniques passed down through generations of human farmers who had wrested crops from hostile environments. He mulched around the plants with native vegetation to retain moisture. He built windbreaks from rocks to protect seedlings from drying winds. He created shade structures that protected plants during the hottest parts of the day, while allowing growth during cooler periods. Professor Quinn monitored the garden's progress through satellite, imaging and sensor data. Against all scientific predictions, the plants were not just surviving, they were thriving. The water efficiency he's achieving is impossible, she reported to the Academy Council. He's using 40% less water than our most advanced systems, and his plants are showing better growth rates than crops in our controlled environment laboratories. By the 10th day, Jake's garden was green and growing in the middle of the red desert. Small tomato plants were developing their first fruits. Squash vines were spreading across carefully prepared soil, and in the center of it all, watermelon. Plants were growing with a vigor that defied every agricultural model in the galactic databases. Jake knelt among his plants as the morning sun painted the valley walls gold and red. The watermelon vines were already showing tiny green fruits, growing faster than should have been possible in such an environment. "Hey, Nick," he called into his communicator. "Tell Professor Quinn that the watermelons are setting fruit. At this rate, I might have ripe melons by the time I'm supposed to come back." The silence on the radio lasted so long that Jake wondered if his communicator had broken. Finally, Nick's voice came through, quiet with amazement. "Jake, the entire botanical department is watching your satellite feed. Dr. Quinn says what you're doing should be scientifically impossible." Jake grinned as he checked the irrigation channels and adjusted shade covers for his plants. Good thing plants can't read scientific papers. In his hidden valley, surrounded by growing crops in the middle of an alien desert, Jake felt connected to every farmer in human history who had looked at impossible land and decided to make it bloom anyway. The desert that was supposed to kill him was becoming a garden, and the watermelons were getting bigger every day. On the morning of his 14th day in the scorching expanse, Jake woke up to the sound of running water and the rustle of healthy plants in the desert breeze. His hidden valley had transformed from a barren rock shelter into a green oasis that defied every law of xenobiology the Academy taught. The watermelons were ripe. Jake rolled out of the simple shelter he had built from rocks and fabric, stretched muscles that had grown lean and strong from 2 weeks of desert living, and walked to his garden. 3 large watermelons sat among the vines, their striped green shells perfect and full. Smaller tomatoes hung red and heavy from their plants. Squash blossoms opened to catch the morning light. "Nick, you there?" Jake spoke into his communicator as he tested one of the watermelons with his knuckles. The hollow thump told him it was ready to eat. "I'm here, Jake. Final pickup is scheduled for noon. How are you holding up?" Jake looked around his valley paradise and grinned. "I'm doing great. Better than great, actually. I think I could stay out here for another month." Back at the academy, that statement sent shockwaves through the assembled faculty. Dr. Wells studied Jake's vital signs through the remote monitoring system. After 2 weeks in conditions that should have killed him, the human was showing better health markers than when he had started. "His muscle tone has improved," she reported to Professor Veltar. "His cardiovascular efficiency is up 15%. His hydration levels are optimal. By every measure, the desert environment has made him stronger." Professor Veltar's crystalline form was cycling through rapid color changes, the Minervan equivalent of excitement mixed with disbelief. "This contradicts everything we know about biological stress responses. Hostile environments should weaken organisms, not strengthen them." Jake carefully harvested his 3 watermelons, loading them into a backpack he had woven from plant fibers. He also picked the best tomatoes and selected seeds from his most successful plants. The alien botanists would want to study everything. As he prepared to leave his valley, Jake felt genuinely sad. This place had become more than just a survival challenge. It had become home. The morning routine of checking plants and adjusting irrigation. The satisfaction of watching green life thrive in red emptiness. The deep peace that came from living simply in harmony with a harsh environment. "Goodbye, old friend," he said to the valley as he shouldered his pack. "Thanks for the lessons." The walk back to the pickup point took 3 hours, following landmarks Jake had memorized during his explorations. His skin was deeply tanned, his body lean and efficient. The baseball cap his grandfather had given him was faded almost white, but it still shaded his eyes as he walked across the red landscape. The pickup shuttle was already waiting when Jake crested the final ridge. Around the landing site, a crowd had gathered: students, faculty, researchers, and officials from the planetary government. Word of the humans' impossible desert survival had spread beyond the academy. Jake walked into the crowd carrying his backpack of watermelons, and the assembled aliens fell silent. They had expected to see a barely alive human stumbling out of the desert, possibly requiring medical assistance. Instead, they saw a confident young man who looked like he had just returned from a pleasant camping trip. "Student Collins," Dean Christopher Hayes called out as Jake approached. The Centaurian administrator was flanked by government officials and scientific advisors. "You appear to be in remarkable condition." "Thank you, sir. The desert was a good teacher." Jake set down his backpack and opened it carefully. "I brought presents." The watermelons rolled out onto the ground, perfect and ripe, impossible fruits from an impossible garden. The crowd stared in absolute silence. Professor Quinn was the first to speak. "Student Collins, These watermelons are fully mature. They show no signs of stress, disease, or inadequate nutrition. How is this possible? Jake picked up one of the melons and tapped it with his knuckles. Same way my great-grandmother grew them in Oklahoma during the drought years. You find the right spot, you work with the water you have, and you let the plants do what they want to do. Dr. Wells pushed through the crowd to examine Jake. May I? She asked, pulling out a medical scanner. Sure, Doc. The scanner's readings appeared on a holographic display for everyone to see. Jake's health parameters were not just normal, they were excellent. His bone density had increased. His muscle efficiency was up significantly. His cardiovascular system was operating at peak performance. This is unprecedented, Dr. Wells announced to the crowd. 2 weeks in extreme conditions have improved his physical condition in every measurable way. Dean Hayes stepped forward. Student Collins, the Planetary Council has asked me to extend an offer. Would you consider leading an extended expedition to map and develop the desert regions of Zephyros Prime? Jake looked out at the red expanse that stretched to the horizon. With respect, sir, I think you're missing the point. You don't need me to develop the desert. You need to learn to see it the way humans do. What do you mean? Professor Veltar asked. Jake pulled out his survival knife and cut into one of the watermelons. The flesh inside was perfect, red, sweet, and full of juice. He cut slices and began handing them out to the amazed crowd. Every human who's ever lived in a desert knows the same thing, Jake explained, as aliens tentatively tasted the impossible fruit. The desert isn't empty. It's not hostile. It's just different. Once you stop fighting it and start working with it, it becomes your partner. Luna accepted a slice of watermelon with webbed hands, her gills fluttering as she tasted sweetness, grown in hell. But Jake, your people said humans are fragile. The galactic databases show your species requires specific conditions to survive. Jake laughed, the sound carrying across the red landscape. Luna, those reports were written by people trying to keep us safe, not people trying to see what we could do. There's a difference between needs and wants. Dr. Pete Morgan, the head of planetary development, was frantically taking notes on his tablet. Student Collins, if humans can cultivate the scorching expanse, it could triple our planet's usable surface area. The economic implications are staggering. Then stop thinking about economics and start thinking about partnership, Jake replied. The desert will give you everything you need, but only if you approach it with respect instead of conquest. As the crowd dispersed, and preparations began for the return to the academy. Jake found himself standing with Nick at the edge of the landing site. His roommate was shaking his head in amazement. 2 weeks ago, everyone thought you were going to die out there, Nick said. Now they're talking about rewriting the planetary development codes. Jake bit into a slice of his own watermelon, savoring the sweet coolness. Nick, you know what the best part is? What? Jake gestured toward the vast red expanse of the scorching expanse. This desert covers 60% of the planet, and now I know it's not wasteland. It's just farmland that nobody knew how to farm. The transport shuttle lifted off, carrying Jake back to the academy and leaving his Hidden Valley oasis alone in the red desert. But the seeds of change had been planted in more than just the soil. The impossible had become possible, and nothing would ever be the same. 6 months after Jake Collins walked out of the scorching expanse carrying watermelons, the desert hosted its first permanent settlement. The Kepler Agricultural Research Station sat in Jake's Hidden Valley, but it looked nothing like the sterile, climate-controlled facilities that the Academy usually built. Instead of fighting the desert, the station worked with it. solar collectors that doubled as shade structures, buildings designed to channel cooling breezes, water systems that captured and recycled every drop of moisture, and everywhere green growing things that should not have been able to survive in such a place. Jake stood on the observation deck of the main building, watching teams of human agricultural consultants work alongside alien scientists. The partnership had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. Zephyros Prime was not the only world sending representatives to learn human desert techniques. Requests were coming in from across the galaxy. "Quite a view," said Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the director of the new Extreme Environment Agriculture Program. She was a weathered woman in her 50s who had spent her career helping humans farm in difficult places back on Earth. When the Academy had requested human experts, she had been among the first to volunteer. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Jake replied. Below them, Zix was learning to build irrigation channels under the guidance of a human engineer from Arizona. Luna was studying plant root systems that could extract maximum moisture from desert soil. Even Korath, whose people had evolved in deserts, was amazed by the techniques humans had developed. The Planetary Council approved 3 more research stations this morning, Dr. Mitchell continued. They want to establish a pilot program covering 10,000 square kilometers of formerly unusable desert. Jake nodded, but his attention was caught by a familiar figure approaching across the settlement. Professor Veltar's crystalline form was accompanied by Dean Hayes and several officials Jake did not recognize. "Student Collins," Dean Hayes called as the group reached the observation deck. "I would like you to meet Ambassador Krell from the Galactic Development Council." Ambassador Krell was a tall, imposing figure from the Rigelian hegemony, his crystal blue skin marking him as one of the most advanced species in known space. He studied Jake with obvious curiosity. "So you are the human who has revolutionized our understanding of hostile environment adaptation," Ambassador Krell said. His voice carried the formal tones of galactic diplomacy. "The Council has reviewed your achievements, and we have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" Jake asked. "There are 47 worlds in our sector alone that have been classified as uninhabitable due to extreme environmental conditions. Desert worlds, ice worlds, high radiation worlds, places where no known species can establish permanent settlements." Professor Veltar's excitement was making his crystalline form glow. "Ambassador Krell has seen our reports about human environmental adaptation. He believes your species might be able to colonize worlds that we have written off as impossible." Jake thought about his grandfather, who had built a life in places other people avoided. About his great-grandmother, who had grown crops during the worst drought in American history. About the thousands of humans who had always looked at impossible places and seen opportunity instead of obstacles. "What exactly are you asking?" Jake said carefully. "We want to establish a human environmental adaptation corps," Ambassador Krell explained. "Teams of human specialists who could survey and develop the galaxy's most challenging worlds. Your species would become the pioneers of environments that defeat everyone else." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward. "With respect, Ambassador, humans aren't magic. We're just adapted to a planet that never made things easy for us." "Precisely, Ambassador," Krell replied. "Earth appears to be one of the most environmentally challenging worlds in known space. Your species evolved to handle extremes that would destroy most civilizations. This makes you uniquely valuable for frontier development." Jake looked out at the desert settlement below, where impossible gardens grew in impossible heat, tended by humans and aliens working together. The sight filled him with pride, but also with a growing sense of responsibility. Ambassador, if we do this, it can't just be about development and economics. These environments aren't problems to be solved. They're places to be understood and respected. Explain. Jake pointed to the gardens below. Every one of those plants is growing because we learned to work with the desert, not against it. The moment you start thinking of environments as enemies to defeat, you lose the partnership that makes success possible. Ambassador Krell studied the thriving settlement with new understanding. You are suggesting that human success comes not from superiority, but from cooperation with hostile conditions. Exactly. My grandfather always said that nature isn't trying to kill you. It's testing whether you deserve to be there. Pass the test, and it becomes your ally. Over the following weeks, representatives from dozens of worlds arrived at the Desert Research Station. They came to study human techniques, but they stayed to learn a completely different approach to environmental challenges. The Kepler Academy established a new department, Adaptive Environmental Sciences, with Jake as its youngest faculty member. Students from across the galaxy came to learn not just how to survive in extreme conditions, but how to thrive in partnership with them. Jake's old classmates became some of his most dedicated supporters. Luna developed aquatic adaptations of human farming techniques. Zix's people began applying human persistence principles to their own challenging environments. Korath returned to his homeworld with water conservation methods that revolutionized Draknari agriculture. But the most significant change was not technological, it was philosophical. Before Student Collins, Professor Veltar announced during Jake's faculty appointment ceremony, we saw hostile environments as barriers to expansion. Now we understand that what we called hostile was simply challenging, and challenges, as humans have shown us, are opportunities in disguise. Jake stood before the assembled Academy community, still wearing his faded baseball cap, still carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never met an environment he could not handle. In the 6 months since his desert expedition, he had grown from an underestimated exchange student into the youngest faculty member in Academy history. When I first came here, Jake said in his acceptance speech, everyone worried about keeping me safe from your world. Turns out maybe your world needed protecting from human optimism instead. The crowd laughed, but the truth behind the joke resonated throughout the galactic community. Earth's children did not just adapt to impossible conditions, they transformed them into opportunities. As Jake returned to his new office in the Environmental Sciences building, Nick was waiting with a datapad full of consultation requests. 3. New worlds this week, Nick reported. An ice planet where the average temperature is -40. A volcanic world with constant acid rain, and something called a storm world where the wind never stops blowing. Jake grinned and pulled on his grandfather's baseball cap. Sounds like Tuesday. When do we leave? Outside the office windows, the desert stretched red and beautiful to the horizon. What had once been considered the most worthless land on Zephyros, Prime was now the foundation for a new understanding of what was possible, and in hidden valleys scattered across the scorching expanse, watermelons grew in impossible gardens, sweet and cool under alien suns. The galaxy had learned what humans had always known. There were no hostile environments, only environments that required different kinds of friendship. And humanity, it turned out, was very good at making friends with impossible places. Jake picked up the consultation requests and started planning his next adventure. After all, 47 impossible worlds were waiting, and someone had to show them what humans could do when they stopped believing in limitations. The desert had been just the beginning.